Hello and welcome to this video on installing Kubernetes on Azure. My name is Rob Bagby. I'm an engineer at Microsoft, and over the next 15 to 20 minutes, I'm going to illustrate how you can install and configure a custom Kubernetes cluster on Azure. Now, you don't have to walk through all the steps we're going to go through today. We do have an offering called AKS, which is our Managed Kubernetes. And that's where we handle the masters for you. You can install in literally 1 or 2 lines of code. And you can do orchestrator upgrades, all of those things you would expect out of a managed service. However, there are times where you want to customize your own cluster. And for that, in Azure, you use acs-engine, and that's what I'm going to show you how to do today. So the steps are fairly involved, which is why I'm creating this video. The first thing you're going to do is create a resource group. Then you'll create a service principal, create an SSH key, and with the service principal and SSH key, you'll create an ARM template with the help of a tool called acs-engine. Then you'll deploy that ARM template, install kubectl, and then copy the credentials and connect to your cluster. So with that, let's get started. As you can see, the first step is for us to create a resource group. So if you're not familiar with what a resource group is, it's simply a way to group a set of related resources. You can think of it as a lifecycle boundary. So if items that have similar life cycles or lifetimes, if they get deleted together or created together, then they belong in the same resource group. But if they differ, they belong in different resource groups. You can create a resource group with either the Azure portal, with PowerShell, or like me, you can use the Azure CLI. In order to use the CLI, you have to install it. Just do a search in your favorite search engine for install Azure CLI 2.0, and it's quite simple. So these are the 2 commands you're going to run. You're going to run az login to authenticate your session, and then you're going to call az group create, passing it the name of your resource group and the location. So there also might be another step if you have multiple subscriptions. You might have to call az account list and az account set. And that's what I'm probably going to have to do. So with that, let's open up a terminal session and let's authenticate. So I'm just going to do az login. Good. And here's the code that I need to enter in my browser session. So I'm just going to open up my browser, go to aka.ms, device login, enter in my code. Good to go. So now my session is authenticated. So I'm just going to do an az account list to see what all my accounts are. I can see all my accounts here. I don't have to do the list. So I'm going to do an az account set -- subscription. And then I'm going to set that to be my internal Microsoft subscription. And we're good to go. It's all clear, and now I can do an az group create -- name, and we'll call this acs-engine test. We'll call it acs-engine demo rg, and we'll do -location West US. And in just a moment, our resource group should be created, and we're ready to move on to step 2. The second step is for us to create our service principal. So a service principal is an identity for an application, and you assign permissions to that identity. We need to create a service principal because when we create our Kubernetes cluster, we need to give it the identity so that it's able to do things like create a load balancer or a public IP on our behalf. So you can again create a service principal via the portal, PowerShell, or the Azure CLI, which is what I'm going to do. And you can see this command, while it looks a little bit scary, is really quite simple. It's az ad for Active Directory, sp for Service Principal, create for RBAC. You're going to set the role of contributor, and then you're going to pass the scopes. And the scope is going to be really simple for us to get. All we're going to have to do is list out our resource groups, and we can copy it directly from there. So with that, why don't we just jump into the terminal and do that? So as I mentioned, I want to go do an az group list. If I go up a little bit, we'll see the resource group I created called acs-engine demo rg. So I'm going to copy that into the clipboard. And then we'll just do az-adsp, create for RBAC, role, and then scopes. And then we'll just paste in what we had. Now it's important to note that I'm scoping this this service principal to my specific resource group I created. I don't want to scope the service principal to, say, the subscription, because then I'm giving it too much authority. So here I'm just giving it the authority over my specific resource group, and that's as limited as I can get. So you can see that now it's been created, and the two things I really need to take note of are the app ID and the password. We're going to use these when creating our cluster, and so I'm going to go ahead and copy this off to a safe place, and we're ready to move on to step 3. The next step is for us to create an SSH key. Now you can use SSH keygen like I'm going to if you're on Linux, OS X, or even on Windows. Or on Windows you can also use a tool called puttygen. I'm going to go ahead from my Mac, I'm going to go ahead and create my key using SSH keygen. So with that, let's go ahead and open up our terminal session, and let's just do SSH keygen. And then we're going to give it a custom file name, and so let's just put it in my right directory. And let's call it id_rsa_acs-engine. And then let's do a -trsa and -b 2048. We should be good. I'm going to enter my passphrase. And now I've got my key. So I can do an ls -lart, and let's just do .ssh. And then let's do, let's see, what did I call it? id_rsa_acs-engine. And there we go. And we can see that my two keys are created, and we're ready to move on to the next step. The next step is a little bit more involved. It's to create the ARM template with acs-engine. So an ARM template is just some JSON that we're going to use to basically describe all of the topology of the application that we want to install into Azure. We're going to use a tool called acs-engine to generate that. So acs-engine is an ARM template generator written by the engineers at Microsoft, and it's open source. You can find it on github.com, /Azure, /acs-engine. So the process that we're going to follow is we're going to download the latest release. You can also download all the source code and run it through a Docker file, or run it from, if you have Go installed on your machine. But just all we need is the exe that we can get from the latest release. We're going to craft up a template from the examples that you're going to find out on GitHub, and then we're going to run acs-engine generate against it with that little command there. So it's actually not as bad or as complicated as it seems. So with that, why don't we just walk through a demo? So you can see right here, I'm in a directory called demos, and if I do an ls, you can see that I really don't have anything in there. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go out to github.com, /Azure, /acs-engine. I'm going to click on the releases, and we're going to find our Darwin release for us. I'm going to copy this thing. So I'm just going to copy the link address, and then if we go here, I'm just going to do a wget, and then we'll paste that in. Okay, now this is going to take just a second for us to download, and then I'm just going to untar that. So let's do a tar xvf, and then we'll do that to my tar file that was downloaded, and we're good to go. So you can see that we now have an acs-engine -v0 ... directory. So ls into that. Let's just ls that, and you can see we have acs-engine. So let's cd into that. And you can see that I have my acs-engine executable here. So next thing I need to do is I need to create a templates directory. So I'm just going to do make dir templates. And let's cd into templates. Okay, so now what I need to do is I need to go get a template, or at least the start of a template from acs-engine. And so if we go back up in here to the root of github.com, /Azure, /acs-engine, you can see that there's an examples directory. And inside of here, there are a bunch of examples of different templates that you can create. You can install a DCOS cluster, you can look at managed disks, storage account, etc. For me, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the Kubernetes releases, and I'm going to start with the Kubernetes 19.json. I'm going to go to the raw, and we'll just wget this. So I'm going to copy that, and I'll wget. And we've got that. So if I do ls-lart, that's great. We've got Kubernetes 1.9.json, and we can actually take a look and see what this looks like. So let's just do code Kubernetes.json. That should bring up Visual Studio Code for us, and we can see, make this a little bit smaller, you can see this is our little template. So we've got a bunch of different profiles. We've got the orchestrator profile where we're telling what we want, Kubernetes 1.9. You've got the master profile saying I want one master. I need to enter in a DNS prefix. So let's call this demo acs-engine and see if that works. I've got my VM size. I'm going to set this to the D4 V2. Then we look at our agent pool profiles. We've got one agent pool with 3 nodes in it, and I'm going to use the standard D2 V2 VM size. I've got my Linux profile. I'm going to set this my user admin to be VM admin, and then here's where I want to enter in my SSH key and my service principal profile credentials. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video while I enter these, and then we'll go ahead and update our template a little bit more. Okay, I've copied in my my SSH key, my client ID, and my secret. So why don't I go ahead and show you what I did? If you'll remember, when I created the service principal, we were given the app ID and the password. This app ID I entered. You can see that it's 039 something F, and that's the client ID, and the secret is my password. Okay, and don't worry, I've already deleted these by the time I put the video out. The next thing you'll notice is I put in the SSH key. And so if you'll remember, when I created the SSH key, if I go ahead and just cat the SSH ID RSA acs-engine.pub, that's the key that I copied into the template. So I've now got my template all set up with everything I need, but I want to add a couple more things in here because I want to show you a couple more things that you can do. You can see that I've set my orchestrator profile to Kubernetes 1.9, but we can also do things like set up network policy. And so all of those things you can find again out in the GitHub. And so if we go ahead back and we go back into examples, for example, we can go ahead and look at how we might set up network policy to use Calico. And if you see right in here, the big difference is after the orchestrator type of Kubernetes, we can go ahead and get the Kubernetes config and set the network policy to be Calico. So let's copy that in and let's make that change in our template just to see how we might do something like that. So right here, after our orchestrator release of 1.9, I'm just going to paste in my Kubernetes config, setting the network policy to Calico. And the other thing I'll do here is I'll show you how you can just be explicit to make sure that we enable RBAC. And we'll set that to true. Okay, so with that, we're all ready to go, and we can actually run acs-engine against this template. So let's do that. Okay, so we're going to go back to our terminal, and inside of our terminal, let's go ahead and do, we need to move back a directory. Let's see what directory we're in. We're in the templates, so we'll move back a directory, and let's do /acs-engine generate, pass it our template, and see the name Kubernetes 1.9.json. And it's going to go ahead. You can see that it's generating assets into a folder called _output demo acs-engine, which is what I entered in the template for my DNS prefix. Otherwise, you can actually pass it a switch and specify exactly the directory you want this thing output to. So let's just do a cd to our output directory, ls-lart, and you can see there's that demo acs-engine directory. And if we go into that demo acs-engine directory and we do an ls-lart, you can see that we've got our acs-engine template, which is this Azure deploy.json. We've got the parameters file, and then we've got a bunch of certificates that were created for us. And so the next step of our demo is for us to go ahead and deploy our cluster by deploying this ARM template. But before we do that, let's just take a real quick look at the Azure deploy.json. Take take a look at that in code, and you can see that the real benefit of us taking advantage of acs-engine, if you tried to craft up this and make changes to this big giant 2,000 line long template, it would be quite painful. But it's very simple for us to make those changes, add things like RBAC directly in using acs-engine, which is why the tool was built in the first place. So with that, we'll move on to our next step, which is going to be to deploy this template. So the next step is for us to deploy our ARM template. And again, we can do that either through the portal, PowerShell, or the CLI. We're going to do it through the CLI. So we're going to run az group deployment create, pass it the resource group name. We're going to pass it the name of our template file and the name of our parameters file, both of which were created for us via acs-engine. So this should be relatively simple to do. So let's go ahead into our terminal, which we've already authenticated to. And let's just do az group deployment create. And then let's do a -G, and that's acs-engine demo RG. And then let's do a template file. That's template-file. And that's going to be, I think it's called Azure deploy.json. And then parameters. And let's just go ahead and check this again, and it's going to be parameters, and that's Azure at Azure .parameters.json. And that @ sign you see in there for the parameters is telling it, go ahead and look for a file, because you can pass parameters inline and not pass a file. And so this thing's going to take a little bit of time for us to create our cluster. So I'll pause the video and we'll come back when the cluster's been created. As you can see, the installation was successful, or the deployment anyways was successful, and we're ready to move on to the next step. The next step is to install kubectl, the CLI for Kubernetes, and that's easy enough to do. Here's the URL that you can go to, or you can just open up your favorite search engine and do a search on install kubectl. You'll find it. Be the first listing, and you can install on Windows. You can use Chocolatey or Homebrew on Mac OS, but you get the full set of instructions in order to install that. Once you have all that, the next section will teach you how to download the credentials, and then you can connect to your cluster. So the last step is for us to copy the admin X509 certificate locally, so we can connect to our kubectl to our Kubernetes cluster via the kubectl CLI. So as mentioned, the admin X509 certificate is added to the master, and all we need to do is copy that locally, and then you just can connect to your cluster via kubectl. So because I'm on OS X, I can use the scp command, scp, and then pass in whatever I set the admin name for my VMs. In my case, if you remember, it was VM admin, and I set that in that original acs-engine template. Add either the IP address or DNS name to your master, and I'll show you how to find that. And then the path to the config file on the master, and then the path to the config file on your local machine. In my case, I'm giving it a non-standard config file. I'm putting it in a location where kubectl is going to look for it, but I'm giving it a non-standard name. So I need to set an environment variable telling kubectl where that config file is. Once I've set that environment variable, then I can connect via the kubectl CLI. And that's really a nice thing to know. If you decide to use multiple config files on a terminal-by-terminal session basis, you can set different kube configs, so you can have different terminals talking to different clusters. So with that, let's go ahead and take a look in the portal how we can find this IP address or DNS name, and then let's go ahead and run the commands. So inside of the portal, I clicked on all resource groups, and then I'm going to choose acs-engine demo resource group. And then I'm going to sort by type and take a look at the public IP addresses. There should only be one, and this is the public IP address to your master. Now you can see, here's the DNS name that I'm using, so I'm going to copy that into the clipboard, and then I can use that in that scp command. I might add that if you're running on Windows, you can use pscp, which is a PuTTY utility, to do secure copy. So you can see here in my terminal session, I've got scp vmadmin at demo acs-engine, my DNS name, to the kube config file, and then pointing it, and I want to go ahead and call this, let's call this config demo. And then I'm going to hit return. And it's going to give me a permission denied. And that's because I don't have the SSH key specified for that cluster. And so I actually had a different SSH key that's got the default name that SCP is going to use. So what I need to do is I need to do SCP -I, and then I'm going to pass the path to my SSH directory. And then here I'm going to choose my ID RSA acs-engine. And then I'm going to hit return, and it's going to ask for my passphrase. Hopefully you remember that. And I do, and my config file was loaded. So if I do an ls -lart, and let's do .cube, you'll see down here, here's my config demo. So if I go ahead and do an export, kubeconfig equals, and then let's do the pass to my cube file, and then paste in the config demo. Good. Now if I do kubectl get nodes, and you'll see that I've got all the nodes listed from my cluster, and I'm able to successfully connect through the CLI. So I hope this video has been helpful for you in illustrating how you can set up and deploy a custom Kubernetes cluster and then connect to it after bringing down the certificate. If you have any questions, you can reach me at rob.bagby@microsoft.com. Thank you.